And yes, I think we are live. I'm here with my new friend Rafael. How are you doing?
I'm well. I'm well. Yourself?
I'm doing well. Do people call you Rafael or Raf?
You know what? I get Rafi, I get Raphael, I get Raf.
L?
But
Do people call you L?
no, I don't want to be called L. That's like a holy name.
Ah.
I don't know L, no Elohim. Raphael's good.
Okay. And remind me, I should know this, but what does Raphael mean? Something of God?
That's right. It's it's the healing of God is the translation, the Hebrew
Oh,
translation.
oh, wow. Very cool. I do pray to Raphael, but every day I've got a devotion to
Okay.
Saint Michael, Saint Gabriel, Saint Raphael, my guardian angel. All the angels. I do the nine choirs of angels. I do prayers for the nine different choirs and asking for help for the different challenges and stuff like that. We're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into that
Okay.
the Catholic
Okay.
stuff. We're getting into all that Catholic stuff later, hopefully. But
Well, good.
first,
It's Sunday.
yeah, yeah. So first, I'd like you to go back as always and talk about your own journey, touching on the highlights. I think you may have seen a couple of my episodes, so you know how it works. Just talk about the early childhood, how you were raised, and I read your bio briefly. I don't like to learn too much about my guests, but I read your bio briefly, and it looks like you had a quite an interesting journey. So take it away.
So I grew up in California in a little town called Beverly Hills. I was adopted by a Sephardic Jewish family from that town, and I did not know this for about let's say 31 years, and I kind of stumbled upon the news that I was adopted, which is was obviously just pretty traumatic and just kind of shook me up, kind of just blew my mind, frankly. And I had to do some real analysis on who I was, what I believed, where I was from, nature versus nurture. And I'd had quite a spiritual upbringing to some degree because I was raised up as a Sephardic Jew. Although my background, I was German and so part Ashkenazi. But I was raised as a Jew. I was given the name Raphael in honor of a cousin. That family, most of them perished in the Holocaust in Auschwitz in Poland in the war. But I was given the name as kind of a tribute to the family. Spent a little bit of time in the synagogues. Of course, I was bar mitzvahed. And at some point, my mother decided that the family was going to become Christian. And I was about 9 or 10 years old. This was down in Los Angeles. We started going to a little church called the Hideaway there. And we joined that church because my mother had a girlfriend who was married to a movie star, a television star. His name was Michael Landon.
Oh yeah.
And Michael Landon was Jewish, but his wife was Christian. And when they split apart, it was very difficult for the woman, and she kind of turned back to her faith as something to lean on. And she brought my mother along to the churches, and we eventually found a kind of a messianic Jewish church, which we started following. And I wrote about that in the last book. Maybe we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Maybe not, but I was baptized in my pool. So was my mother and my sister. My father, they almost got him, but he kind of pushed back.
The one that got
Got
away.
a
He was the big one. The one that got
Yes,
away.
he was. He was. Although I read the notes in his Bible, and I'd like to think that he kind of came around. But we were baptized. Then shortly after thereafter kind of fell out of the faith. It was a very good year for my family, I'll tell you that, because we had a lot of kind of domestic trouble in the family, and the church really fixed a lot of that. But unfortunately, it didn't last, and we stopped going to church. Um, I went later and was bar mitzvahed, and then I was sent to Israel and had some pretty profound experiences there, walking the streets of Jerusalem. And I had a just kind of a change of heart at that point. But when I came back, I went to college and I became a an avowed atheist. I worked in the G. Gordon Melton American Religions collection in Santa Barbara, and I was just kind of soaked up all this stuff on Darwin, and my brain just kind of fried. Um, didn't really have a lot of guidance, so I kind of fell out of it. And I was gone a long time. I basically got on the road to Damascus before meeting uh, Jesus, and I was a very rough on Christians and Christians around me. Really a terrible person when it came to that. And I can't say I persecuted them because it wasn't something that I could do, but it was not in my heart to be kind. And I did a lot of things I regretted, but I met a young man there named Joseph, whose father was a pastor from San Clemente, and we would debate all night. And I think a lot of his word got into me because eventually I found my way back to the church, which, and I just came back from church actually, I'd
Yeah.
say only a couple hours ago. And I'm kind of solidly there in my faith now. So it's been a long one, but I'm
Wow.
glad I came back.
Wow. Forgive me if you mentioned it, but what's the situation with the siblings? I guess you don't have blood siblings. Do you have adopted siblings, or what's the deal?
I do. Well, I have a few siblings. One who passed away. The one who passed away, um, when he died, my mother was emotionally distraught. Obviously, he was hit by a car when he was 17, and so that's at that point I was adopted from a family. I turned out that they were a very interesting musical family, but they couldn't. They didn't want to have a child. They were afraid that what it would do to the reputation of their family because they were quite famous. And so I was given to my mother and raised there, and then I had two older siblings there as well. One was adopted, but she knew, but I never knew. And so when I found out, I had to say, like, who am I? Like, what does this mean? And it's funny, Dave, because some of this conversation people are having about identity, which is big now. Who am I? What am I? Am I a boy? Am I a girl? Like, it's it's funny. It's just when I look at it within the context of how I was raised, I sometimes I think, did I just adopt this personality because this was what my mother and father were like, or what part of this was them and what part of that was my genetics. So unraveling that's been a great experience overall.
Oh, well, you mentioned genetics, so how diverse is your background that way? Like I'm Irish, Scottish, English, Welsh, and a bit of Scandinavian. It's not very diverse, but have you looked into your background in depth at all?
I have. I hired a woman because I could not. The lawyer who handled my adoption was a very skilled barrister. He kind of put the lock on it. So I had to pay quite a sum in order to kind of crack this case. When I found out, I learned that we were Lithuanians,
Ah,
and so my father was German, but he was having an affair with a woman, which was my birth mother, and his wife at the time was pregnant. So when my birth mother told him of the pregnancy, he obviously was in shock, didn't want to have anything to do with her. And she came to Los Angeles where her father was and had the child. And so I have learned that I was Lithuanian, German, which is interesting too, because I grew up in a Jewish household. So, there's a lot of history there between, the Jews
I
and
hadn't heard,
Germany.
but
Yeah, I've heard. I mean, I know just a little bit I've heard, but and so that's kind of a little bit of a clash, for me. But like I said, overall, I have kind of taken that Judaism, and now I've accepted Christ as a messianic Jew. So I
okay. So I was just looking up Lithuania and Germany. They're both predominantly Catholic, especially Lithuania. But even Germany, it's the largest religious group is still Catholic today. Um,
yeah.
so because of your journey, obviously you have that Jewish element, but we Christians, um, we all identify as children of Abraham, spiritual children of Abraham, and You know, the Jews are our elder brothers, you know, obviously in the faith, and they were the priestly people to the nations, and that's the whole point of God having chosen them, was to cater to the nations, cater to the non-Jews. You know, the goal being in salvation history, to in the economy of salvation, to bring everyone, or as many as possible, to heaven, ultimately to God. So, you know, the whole question of the Jews, the Jewish question or whatever, is always very delicate, and it's very important. We can't overlook it, you know, as certainly as Christians. But I think any monotheist has to struggle with, who are these chosen people, and why, and what does it mean, and you know. So, have you really examined all of that, from a religious, point of view?
Yeah, I know. As I had mentioned earlier, I found myself at the University of California at Santa Barbara, and I was working as an intern at the library there. And in the library, there were two collections. One was what I believe it is still the largest collection of religious literature in the United States regarding Christianity, outside, I think, of some type of Catholic institution like Pepperdine or something like that. It's called the G. Gordon Melton collection at the University of California. And in that collection is just about every spiritual and Christian text you can find, cataloging all of the diversity of Christianity in North America, I should say, in the Americas,
Yeah.
from the 1700s on. And then in the other wing of this library was what they called the Darwin collection. And that was a bunch of Enlightenment texts from Darwin. And actually, because I knew we were going to have this call, I just got one of the books that was in that collection. I didn't take it out of the library, of course, but I bought it on eBay, and it's
uh,
called. This is a book that really
Hold it in front of your
influenced me.
face there. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's
The
called
evolution of the idea of God. Okay.
The Evolution of the Idea of God, and this is written by Grant Allen in 1931. And so I was really kind of thrown into a struggle over that, and how the idea, you want to call it an idea. I believe it's a truth, but just for the sake of the intellectual argument, how we came to the realization of monotheism. And that I spent quite a bit of my life in the stacks of that library pouring through those texts.
Ah. So you have
Yeah.
you have an unorthodox, hypothesis about the origins of monotheism?
No, not necessarily, but I can tell you that my journey has been probably closer to C.S. Lewis than anybody.
Uh-huh.
I would say that I began as a little bit of a theist, and it got me all the way to the Father and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But I don't think it was immediate. And I argue with my pastor about this quite a bit, David, that, you know, to what degree do people need that level of intellectual stimulation? I think, or just kind of discussion. I think some people can just walk right into it easy. And I think others kind of they go kicking and screaming, but eventually, well, hopefully, if you're lucky, you get there.
Yeah. Yeah. So why I often ask my Christian guests, why, on what basis do you accept the mystery, the mysterious doctrine of the Trinity? Why would you accept that? Why don't you just be, and just being a little bit of devil's advocate here, but why wouldn't you just be a Unitarian? Okay, there's one God, one person, and we don't need to complicate things with the Trinity. No one can understand the Trinity, so why even talk about it? Why bring it in? It's not in the Bible explicitly. So, you know, I firmly believe in the Trinity, but I like to ask questions, question my Christian friends, why they take that leap of faith into, what is one of the most profound mysteries, and we'll never understand it. We're never going to comprehend it, even in heaven. So why do you accept it?
For me, it's three in one. And each is an aspect, with the Father, the
Oh,
Son, and the Holy Ghost. It's
oh,
three in
it's
one.
modalism. It's like modalism, where different modes of the one God. So you're Unitarian. You're
Well,
Unitarian.
otherware I think you'd be a polytheist. I
Are
mean,
you are
it's
you a Unitarian at heart?
no, I don't think so. And my
Okay.
church that I go to up here is a non-denominational,
Uh huh.
but we celebrate some of the sacraments, and we go through ritual. But I had I already had the basis, David, when I grew up, of the monotheism. When I went to the church, I kind of knew what was going on. I kind of didn't. What I would say is that it was the experience. It was the kindness of the people around me. It was the peace that the church brought to my family at such a turbulent time that was really the proof that I needed. But as I got older, and especially in the last few years, as I've read through the Bible and read through the Bible chronologically, or I should say sequentially, from Genesis all the way through the Gospels and Acts, it's kind of gone back and reaffirmed what I believed earlier. Um, but what I would say in terms of that, kind of intellectual piece, I don't think it's as important. In fact, there's an analogy here in this book, that talks about gravity, and that we know that gravity is there. We can't see gravity, but would you question the steps that you took to that Newton took to arrive at the realization of gravity? And could you perhaps dissect them, and they wouldn't look exactly the same for everybody, and yet the truth is the same? But going back to your question, I find that each piece of that Trinity works to kind of speak to me in a different way. I see the Father as a father figure. I see the Son as the King on the right hand of the Father figure, and I see the Holy Ghost as the Spirit that's kind of moving within me. And that's what I feel in the church when we're singing. Um, and I probably have many more years to think about it, and that's
Yeah.
something I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, so remind me again, forgive me if I'm not catching everything, because I'm always distracted by my friend Phil. He makes so many funny jokes in the live chat. You probably can't see it,
Mhm.
but he's always cracking me up with silly nonsense. So but forgive me if you already said it, but when was that decisive moment when you said I am Christian? Like as an adult, in this phase of your journey, how long ago was that exactly?
It was when I moved to Montana, and when I put my hand up in the church,
Okay, okay.
because I think I talked to my wife about this a lot, that you're in the church and you feel the Spirit, and everybody's like 97% there. They're like almost
Uh-huh.
there. They're Christian, they believe, they know that there's a power, but they're not quite ready to give up.
Uh,
And I think the moment of submission is when you say, I'm not embarrassed.
uh,
I am, I am below this God. This is my power. And I submit 100%. And kind of putting your hand up, at least for me, symbolically. And it was not easy to do,
yeah.
but that was the moment I felt like it's over and it's beginning all at the same time.
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's about that commitment, that submission, that relationship with Jesus Christ. Um, and congratulations. So how long ago, remind me, how long ago was that exactly when you put your hand up?
I moved to Montana 3 years ago.
Okay. So
And I
this is like baby steps for you. Do you consider it baby steps, your journey with your walk with Christ? Are you early stages, you still think?
Oh, I'd say I am
Yeah.
absolutely the early stages.
Yeah.
It's something that, uh, I've just begun that piece of it, because I have my wife is came from an Episcopalian home,
Uh,
but she accepted Christ as her savior just not so long ago, and we have, of course, Jewish children, so we're kind of navigating a lot of issues on how to raise the children and how to bring them up, and in my position where I am in Montana, there's many Christians, but there's not many Messianic Jews. So there's not a lot of people to relate to. But I was thinking about, not necessarily, but I know you're Catholic, and I was reading on a forum the other day, and the question was, is has Bob Dylan finally become Catholic? And you know, I thought, gosh, that's so interesting. Is that kind of like the final stage? So,
yeah,
because
it
you
is.
hear about a lot of pastors who will ultimately move towards Catholicism, and I don't know if that's where I'm going to end up, honestly, David. But um, you know, Bob Dylan certainly has been a great, light for me. Being somebody who was Jewish and found Christianity and has has stuck to it to this day. But I don't know if he's Catholic. You'll have to research that. I wasn't
I
able to
doubt it, but
pin
I
those
hope so.
down.
I doubt it, but so yeah, that's fascinating. Wow. So yeah, it's a tricky situation. You know, I converted in 2009, and it's just so painfully embarrassing because when I first converted from atheism, it's all fresh and new, and you know, starting the journey, starting my walk with Christ, and then now it's like, wow, how many years is it since 2009? It's like it's too many years, you know.
15.
Yeah, 15 years. So suddenly it's not so cute anymore. Now it's like, hey, when are you gonna like you know, get beyond the baby stage of your walk with Christ? It's just so embarrassing. But you know, I think God's working with me on my walk with him, and you know, there may be progress that I'm unaware of, but it seems a lot of the time like I'm backsliding. I don't want to be dark. I don't want to like, you know, dampen your mood because you're fresh into this trip. But you know, you have to keep moving forward, and if you're not moving forward, you're gonna inevitably move backwards. So
Yeah, I
it's not
agree.
easy. It's not easy. You know, it's really not easy because, well, for me, I'll just speak for myself, because I'm lazy, I'm selfish, and I'm just you know, just good for nothing sinner. You know, it's just like that. That's the bottom line. So we'll have. That's why we have to build each other up, and we have to support each other, and that's why I do the podcast. For a large part of it is to like talk to Christians, you know, so that I can remind myself, like, hey, I'm Christian. I'm supposed to be Christian, not only you know, lip service, but actual service, you know. So
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's in a way we're living through a very dark time, but there is a lot of light. I see, for example, I see pastors in Canada, get in trouble all the time, and we read news about that unable to practice their faith, and
yeah.
but there's a lot of light too, and my wife and I we were just watching the presidential address of the new president of El Salvador, and he won with 85% of the vote. And he gave a speech. In the last 15 minutes of the speech, he praised God for the last 15 minutes. And a lot of people from El Salvador are Catholic. They came up. They emigrated up through many of them not legally, and ended up in California and parts like that. So I had a lot of experience with those people, and many of them are quite devout Catholics. But El Salvador was destroyed through civil war and a lot of gangland activity. Terrible things happened there. But the president has brought back, basically transformed the country. And in the last 15 minutes, I would highly recommend you and your audience just Google Bukele is the name. He gives the most wonderful speech about how it was really only God who could turn El Salvador around. And it's not being covered on the news. And I think the reason is, even though it's a big presidential election, I don't think they want that message out there, frankly.
Yeah.
It's not popular.
Yeah. Well, you've talked, you know, you've talked a lot about your sort of the externals of your journey, like, you know, the adoption and the Judaism, the Christianity, and sort of we can relate to that, but there's also this spiritual battle, and Satan wants your soul. He still wants your soul. He's always wanted your soul, and he still might get it. I don't know if you're once saved, always saved or not, but from my Catholic perspective, you're still in danger. Like the race has not been won yet. You know, you don't have the crown in hand yet. So that spiritual battle and fighting off temptation. What's your experience been like that? You know, without revealing too much about personal stuff, but you know, the inner life and goodness and evil, and you know, Saint Augustine famously said there are two cities characterized by two loves: love of self unto contempt of God, and love of God unto contempt of self. So that's why I feel I classify myself sort of like as an ex-Satanist, but I'm still kind of a Satanist because I haven't detached from all my worldly concerns and loves and attachments. And you know, so where are you at with the spiritual battle? And I'm sure things are going pretty nicely, but have you seen little hints of the dark side and the demons? Maybe even just in your dream life, or in your waking life too. But what's that like for you?
So here's what I'll tell you. I read the Bible, but I have trouble with the Book of Revelation, and I have trouble with the references to the end times and with respect to men having dreams. Everybody I talk to right now is having a lot of dreams,
Okay.
and but getting back to the real piece of it, and I believe the Eastern Orthodox Church for a long time, even to this day, I think they don't accept that book in their canon. But I could be wrong about that. But at least for many years, they did not accept that book. Um, and I believe that I do believe in Jesus Christ. I believe He will return. I believe that He rose from the dead. I believe all the essential pieces of Christianity. But going back to your point about that struggle, yes, I have the struggle the same as you, the same as the person in the next room. I can measure it by, how I've been able to get past certain addictions that I've had in my life. Had an addiction to,
Ah,
alcohol and narcotics, cigarettes,
oh,
and it is only through God and only through Jesus now that I can keep myself from those things. Um, but I'll tell you what I've found, and what you were saying earlier was, in terms of that darkness. I used to think that when people found Jesus or God in prison, that they were all liars. And I said, because these
um,
people are the farthest that you can be from hope. But actually, they were the closest to hope because their whole lives had been taken away from them. They were in prison, and the only thing that could truly set them free is faith in Jesus, faith in God. And so now when I look at it, I mean, I know that there's some people who are just trying to get paroled, but I also know that there's a lot of them that are truly there. And to think that a man can be good his whole life, and not accept Jesus, and basically, like you said, be in danger and never get out of this place, be separated from God. That's what I consider hell. Is that if you're with God, it's heaven.
yep,
So I really don't even care if there is a hell, because it's not really going to matter to me what the specifics are. The fact is, you're not with God,
yeah,
and that is hell.
yeah.
But to think that a prisoner who's killed three people, four people, and I think it's unlikely that many of them come to Jesus, but to think that that person could get to heaven, and a person who otherwise never committed a crime in their life, it is that paradox is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, in my life personally, I've been able to measure it by those things, and I don't think I'm out of
Out of the
out of
woods.
the dark for any reason. No, it's a long one.
I just want to note, because of what you said about the Orthodox, I'm reading on Catholic.com. It says that some Eastern Orthodox churches do not read from the Book of Revelation at Divine Liturgy, hence they would not call it canonical, but they would still consider it to be divinely inspired and morally binding. So it says in this fluid approach, the Eastern Orthodox are very similar to ancient Judaism. Oh, interesting. So
Okay, I guess I had that wrong. I'll have to go back and do some work on that. But I
this
mean,
this might be wrong too. I mean, Catholic.com, they're not infallible, so whatever.
no, I trust you. I mean, when I think about the books of Enoch that weren't put in.
Uh-huh.
I think
Yep.
about the church in the Ethiopian church, and so I am very early, not just in my faith, but just in beginning to parse those texts. I think even as a Christian who doesn't believe in them, you should at least take a look at
Yeah.
those
Oh yeah.
texts. Hope to do so at some point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I often talk on my podcast about the head-heart connection. I came to the faith through philosophy, studying philosophy, and I do have a heart, I do have emotions, and I'm sensitive and all that. But when it comes to coordinating the two worlds, it's kind of a little bit of a disconnect, and that's largely a protection that when kids get hurt and then they have defense mechanisms and stuff like that. So escaping into the intellect where everything is clean and safe is
Yeah.
it's a pretty common thing to do. But where are you at in terms of you've already mentioned some of the trauma and some of the addictions and some of the pretty classic stuff. Where are you at with the whole head heart connection? Is it something you think about, something you're working on, and where does Christ work on that in your walk?
Yeah, I mean, in my David, what I think is, I have a lot of work to do. I think the Bible lays it out for me in a unique way because as a Jew, before coming to the faith, yeah, I still believed all of that. I did go through a period of atheism, but as I kind of came through, I was first very focused on the Old Testament. So when we bring Jesus into the story and we see what is done to him, um, and the rejection by the Jews, there's a lot of conflict in there that I have within myself. And um, but as I kind of look to it, it is difficult not to look at the contemporary world, or even 100 years ago or 200 years ago, and historically, and see what he needed to do. When he came into the temple and taught, and threw the tables over, and was saying, this is the house of God. How can you be doing this here? You kind of see that kind of stuff going on in different places. It's hard to ignore that. So the story itself starts resonating with my heart, and I can kind of understand where he's coming from the perspective of a Jew. I mean, of course, he was a Jew, as was Saul. And I think kind of going through that, challenging yourself. I think, especially as a Jew, I think it's very difficult to kind of accept that, and especially with your preconceived notions of what the Messiah was supposed to be. What was the Messiah supposed to be? I was told a set of kind of rules and standards, and Jesus, as I knew him, didn't fit into that, because I was trying to understand it through the lens of Judaism, and I think that kind of broke things. But I'll tell you, through in terms of the heart, like you, intellectually, I approached it philosophically, and I think you can get there. I think C.S. Lewis got there that way, more or less. I think a lot of people got there that way. But when I'm in church and I look over and I see somebody for the first time, and their eyes are closed and they're giving themselves over, there's a feeling that you feel in a sanctuary that, to me, that's the feeling. You can't replicate that in an intellectual argument. And so I guess that's how I connect my mind and my heart, at least in the sanctuary, in the church.
Yeah, you trust your heart. But of course, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it says that we shouldn't trust our heart because it's so wicked. But I do understand what you're saying. There's a more direct thing, like we could call it intuition, because in the Bible, the heart is spoken of in many different ways. But one of the primary ways is the sort of the center or the essence of the person. That's the heart of the person, and we do have this thing called intuition, where we can have more direct uh, knowledge, and even even Plato talked about this. So it's a higher kind of knowledge than the deductive reasoning, right? So I agree with you. I did a lot of deductive reasoning to find my way back to God, but then there was a lot of infused knowledge. There was a lot of experience, and sort of this existential confrontation with God and with salvation history, and the economy of salvation, and all these sorts of things, and just the fact of going and worshiping. I mean, it's a visceral experience, and it's
Yeah, and
it's
I think
amazing.
I'm glad you have the podcast to talk about those things. I mean, like going back to Bob Dylan mentioned in that same quote with the Wall Street Journal that he believed in predestination. And I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't looked at that topic for, like, Calvinism. It's like, oh my gosh, this is not supposed to be so complicated. But, and maybe it's important to kind of explore those if you get to. But I think the great thing about the Christianity is that it just kind of starts at this level that it's like goes through everybody. It doesn't require any level of ultimately intellectual capacity. It requires the heart, like you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just trying to find, as I speak with you here, I'm trying to find the dogma in the Catholic Church that talks about predestination. So bear with me 1 second. I'm gonna
Mhm.
find it and get the exact wording here. It's not difficult wording. I just don't want to mess it up. So I've got them on my website. So I'm just gonna look it up here. There is a dogma of predestination. I just want to make sure I get the wording properly and see how you respond to it. Okay. So first of all, there's a dogma that says, and it's a de fide, the highest dogma. Christ did not die for the predestined only. Christ died not for the faithful only, but for all mankind without exception. Um, so, another dogma: God, by his eternal resolve of will, has predetermined certain men to eternal blessedness, and God, by an eternal resolve of his will, predestines certain men on account of their foreseen sins to eternal rejection. So, I mean, there is some common ground. There's some overlap with the Calvinists. Of course, we have more nuance in the Catholic Church because it's certain men, and it's
Yeah.
it's nuanced.
Uh-huh. Well, if you're doing 25 to life,
Uh,
it's I wonder if you think about that, or if you get to the point where you look at that and say, gosh, am I one of those people that I thought about that too in terms of the eternal sin when I was coming, there
the
is
unforgivable sin.
right. And I thought about that. I said, oh my gosh, I said, did I do that? Because did I insult the Holy Spirit? I mean, because Jesus said, I believe, of course, I could be completely screwing this up, and you can call me on it, but I believe it was something to the effect of, you can say something about me, but you can't go through. And I mean, I always saw it as really, if you know the truth and you've been told and you know it deep down in your soul and you still turn your back, then that's it. We don't, if you've chosen, then that is what you have chosen. And I never did that. I think just in my ignorance and never being guided by the right people, I never found that. I never could find that. Even though I went to Israel, of course, I visited the Holy Sepulchre. I met with rabbis. I went to Notre Dame. I talked to priests. I sat in lectures, but I never had people until very later in my life, like in college, like that young man who helped me, to really sit there and be my friend and give this and say, I want you to have this. And even though I rejected him at the time, I don't think I was rejecting the Holy Spirit, because I don't think I had the competency to even understand a concept that like that. Um, and so of course, I give mercy to God, and I ask for forgiveness even for that, if that's the case. And I have no choice over it, David. But I certainly would like to think I didn't do that.
No, of course you didn't. Of course not. You would know. You wouldn't be talking to me right now if you had. Like, it's like that's the thing. I think it's difficult. I do worry about my eternal salvation, but it's the same thing. I worry about my wife. I'm married, and I want to please her. I'm always worried about like displeasing her or whatever. And that's why if you're unmarried, you could be more concerned about pleasing the Lord. And if you are married, you kind of split because you got to worry about pleasing your spouse. But I think it's a healthy worry that I have. Maybe I'm a bit neurotic, but when it comes right down to it, if I start doubting, if I start thinking about it, what if, and do I deserve hell? Well, yeah, I know I deserve hell because of my sins, but I also know that I choose the forgiveness and the mercy of God, and I choose to be in right relationship with Him. And I went to confession this morning because I want to reconcile. I want to. It's the sacrament of reconciliation. It's called this
Right.
the sacrament of joy. So it's like we always have to come back to that personal relationship, and just like in a marriage, yeah, you can insult your wife inadvertently, or sometimes we do it on purpose, but we have to struggle to always keep the relationship healthy and keep our spouse happy. And our spouse as Christians, our mystical spouse, is the God man Jesus Christ, right? So it's always going to be, I think, that struggle. But yeah, I joked earlier that I'm kind of still a Satanist because I still do my own will above God's will. Like it's hard to do God's will, so I just do my will. I do the selfish thing. But that's one level of analysis, and Satan's keeping track of everything I do that's selfish, so that on Judgment Day he can show God, look, he's not a good, faithful spouse, right?
Right.
But God's also keeping track of depths of the heart that Satan doesn't have access to. That's the trick up God's sleeve, because Satan doesn't have access to the intellect per se. He can color our imagination, and he has a certain power, but God really knows the heart in a way that Satan doesn't. So I console myself with that fact, that I am in a relationship with God, and I do value that relationship. And all my neurotic worrying about being saved or not being saved, and it is frightening to think about hell, but it's because I'm like a baby in my Christian walk, and so I don't have that perfect love that casts out fear. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Have you read the Screw Tape Letters?
I don't know if I've read that one completely, but I'm certainly familiar with it.
Yeah.
I think I may have listened to the audiobook at one point, but yeah, I read a lot of C.S. Lewis before I came into the church. It was a big influence, but yeah, great stuff, the Screwtape
Yeah, I know
Letters.
what you're talking about. I mean, I don't put so much emphasis on it either. I mean, I believe Satan, I thought the etymology of it was adversary.
Uh,
And, when I look at the book of Job, it's to me, it's adversarial. I wouldn't entirely be convinced, or I'm not entirely convinced about kind of these illustrations in Dante's Inferno about, what that might look like. Indeed, it may. My father was motivated by not wanting to go to hell. He feared it. And Solomon says, in the end, fear God and obey his commandments, because everything will be brought into the judgment. I sincerely believe it. To me, there's no doubt in my mind that's going to happen. But I think, like you, I cannot speculate too much because it's so beyond my control. But I think it is healthy to know that, because I think people think they're going to get away with it. I do. I really think they are.
yeah.
And I think the Screw Tape Letters, they kind of walk you through a scenario where that happens with each, and I think it's what you're going to make of it. And you should recognize Satan, and you should recognize that adversarial piece of yourself. But where that comes from and how God orchestrates it all at a higher level, um, is purely speculation. I can tell you. And what I put in my book was really this: was that what I have learned in the period of my life in which I had faith versus the period of my life where I was an atheist or had no faith, or was a nihilist and believed in nothing. They are two different lives. One is a life, and one is not a life. And I hate to say that because, you talk to Richard Dawkins or people who follow them, and you don't want to be disrespectful, but it is an empty life, David, in my opinion. And that I know that not because I speculate, not because I lived the life, so I know
Yeah.
what it was. Yeah, and now when I go forward, even with education, my children go to Christian school. They do memory verses, so they imprint those verses on their heart. Things that I say, gosh, I really wish mom and dad had done that with me. I really wish mom had gone to church. I really wish mom and dad had been faithful. I really wish mom and dad had not brought alcohol around the house and had temperance. I mean, these are no brainers. But I don't think some people can get to that until they put themselves through hell.
I have another question for you, but I just want to quickly give a shout out to my friend Daniel Drazinovich. He just showed up in the live chat. I've got a small pool of subscribers, but they're very loyal and friendly. I'm friends with all of them or most of them. But shout out to you, Daniel. But I wanted to ask you about suffering, and I'm sure you've suffered quite a bit in different ways. Physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and the anguish. And we see the life of Christ and how he suffered in all those ways and more, and so profoundly. But when it comes to the relationship between love and suffering, like I said, we just have to look to Christ for the example and the saints. Um, But what is your direct existential experience with that that solidifies that theoretical point?
Well, you made it that, of course, that you have to have the example, and I think you don't have the context unless you have at least. I don't even think, and speaking with the pastor, he said, before there was a Bible, David, or before there was a gospel, there was the story. So it existed before. It was written in a certain way, and in that sense. But in terms of my suffering, like I said, it's kind of like, yes, I can relate to it. But to me, when I look at the story of a man who did nothing wrong but brought the truth and brought this, and what happened to him, it's the perfect example. It's the perfect life, the perfect example, and that is the suffering. Of course, how am I ever going to compare myself to being humiliated and dragged through the streets and nailed up against a cross and being stabbed? Is especially considering what he did and brought to the world. But for my suffering, yeah, I think that there are moments in your life where you say to yourself, like we talked about the prison, I'm at such a low point in my life. I need to see what is above me now. I need to look a little higher. I need to set my suffering aside so I can clear my mind and see what the truth is. And I think the example of Christ, as is preached in the prisons, in the schools, well, where it used to be in the schools, but in our schools, all of that gives you kind of the guideline. I know it's not preached in the Canadian schools. But I can tell you that when that story was preached in the schools in the United States from early on up until the point that they pulled it out of the schools, children had an example. They had an example by which to look at their suffering. So they didn't have to go backwards. They already knew the story. So when they encountered the suffering, they were prepared to understand it, if that
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
any
yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. So, what is your, if you don't mind my asking, what is your prayer life like now? And when you were, like you were a practicing Jew at one point, right? Practicing.
Yes.
So, how do you compare the prayer life, like just, um, well, maybe just start by talking about your prayer life today and what it's all about. Like today, we're already in the evening here. What kind of prayers have you done today, for example?
So I would love to say that I woke up in the morning and I prayed, but I haven't been doing that.
Okay.
But my family prays before every meal.
Yeah.
We do the Lord's Prayer. If we don't do the Lord's Prayer, we say a different prayer. At night, my wife and I pray. We have a prayer list on our iPhone. We have the
Okay.
little notes
Okay.
and we have a list. It's very long, and it's not just for people who have some ailment, but it's for the people in our life, the cousins and the sisters and the brothers that have not found God, and
uh
we are constantly worried about.
oh, it's mostly petition, mostly asking for this person, that person, the other person, and situations.
I think it's
It's
okay to
mostly
ask for
petition. Of
specific
course it's
things.
okay. Of course it's okay. But that dominates your prayer life, the petition aspect.
When I well up like a baby and cry, okay, when I
Yeah.
embarrass myself with
Yeah.
that ugly cry, it's not it's because I want my family to find God, because without it, I feel their lives are empty and I want them to have that.
Yeah.
And then if I wake up in the middle of the night, I pray. I always pray.
Cool.
And I thank God. So, I don't, sometimes I don't sleep well. But I pray every night. Of course, we go to church, religiously every Sunday, and we pray at church. My children, I specifically enrolled them in a Christian school because I wanted prayer to be part of their life. Like I said, my life, the secular life, I lived, among heathens. And I don't want that for my children. I mean, I had family, I had a good mother and father who did their best, but ultimately they did not have God at the center of their universe. And I think if you have that in a home, if you have God in a home, the child is much better likely off to have a better life. That's my belief. So we pray regularly. Absolutely.
I'm very impressed and jealous that you're able to cry for those that you want to be saved, because I've never had anything come close to that level of compassion. So that's a defect in me, and I think you're more of a normal human. But yeah, that's great if you can shed tears. That's amazing. I want to get there. You know, that's I talked about the head heart connection. Like that's seems like you're there, unless it's self-indulgent. There's a self-indulgent, selfish
No,
aspect
I
to
mean,
it.
I have family members that are close to death. But
Ah,
I also have family members that are elderly, but it's not really the age or the ailment. And it's not the fear of them burning. It's, I want them to have fulfillment
life.
in their
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, of course I'm going to cry over it because I mean, that one thing, it's the greatest joy is to be with God. I mean,
Yeah.
if you don't have it, you're done.
Yeah.
You know, it's over. So even if you're a nice person or a wonderful person or a
Yeah.
sweet person,
Yeah. 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 Like,
and so I continue to have it, and even this conversation will have me thinking about it, and
yeah.
afterward, so.
You didn't talk too much about your wife. How did you meet her, and what's she like? And you said she had an Episcopalian background, I believe.
Yes, but her life was also somewhat secular to some degree.
Uh,
And when we met, the two of us were not so great. We were not great people.
how
And
long ago was that?
we met about 15, 16 years ago.
Uh,
We met in an airport, and it was just happenstance.
uh,
And she kind of always had she was secular. I shouldn't say that. They went to church on the high holidays, so she had a little piece of that in her. But we were married by a Buddhist rinban because we couldn't decide if it would be a rabbi or if it would be a priest. And we just remarried beneath the cross in the
oh,
Christian tradition because we just didn't consider it legitimate until we had
uh,
that piece of it. But like I said, with religion too, we had 4 children. We have to figure out how to raise them. And she's a lawyer. She does constitutional law here in Montana. We're very involved with the community and trying to stand upright wherever we can. But we had to have Christ and God in our life to live our life. We're God willing. We're have 4 children, and raising them in a community of God-fearing Christian people is what we had to do together, and we both recognize that. And since we have done that, since we got sobriety, and since we got God in our life, I don't want to say it's perfect, but it's about as closer to perfect than it is the opposite. And so when I tell people marriage, yeah, that's what you have to have. Otherwise, I don't see much success without a clear head and without God being at the center of your family. You know.
yeah, absolutely. So, where do we go from here? I got about 10 minutes left with you. Maybe I'll hand it over to you if you have some bullet points, some topics that maybe you wanted to talk about, which I didn't organically stumble upon. I'll let you.
Yeah. So, the reason I really want to talk to you was because I had written this book, and the book was about the journey that I took. And like I said, I traveled all the way to Jerusalem, and I remember climbing Mount Masada and looking over the sea, and really having an incredible feeling within me that God was going to walk with me, that I wanted God in my life. And I wrote a book, which is called The Bastard of Beverly Hills. And it's about how I was adopted into this Jewish family in Beverly Hills. And the story has a lot of anecdotes about, like these actors and stuff like that. But it's not like a name dropping memoir. It's about how everybody is basically the same, um, and can achieve this. And you and I have just kind of walked through a lot of how I got to that point. You asked me about my wife, the struggles that I had with my wife, and I remember that when I was going to divorce my wife, when things were at the low point, and I write about this in the book. I looked over and she was sleeping or pretending to sleep, and next to her was a copy of the Bible. And it was that symbol that night, you know, that, and I had a little baby at the time, my first son, that just, if that book were not there, I don't know if I'd be here talking to you right now. It was what reminded me of what we were doing together and what our union was. And so I hope you get a chance to read that book,
Yeah.
because I think you'll find some similarities, because I struggled very much. And right now, I say, I know that the story is written, David. I know we win in the end. Okay. But when I see the damage across the landscape of people who are not close to God, it is painful. It's painful to see that, and it's a little less nasty, or I should say, the landscape or the battlefield in Montana, because many more people here are Christ centered, and this is a very religious part of the country. But where I'm from, I mean, it's just like devastation, in terms of young people just totally lost, totally lost. And frankly, the churches, they're not really stepping in too good, and they don't really seem to have the tools to help them. And so I wrote the book in hopes that people who kind of feel like, oh my gosh, like, what have I been doing for 30 years? Like, that's what I thought. I'm like, am I even Jewish? Like, do I believe in God? Who are these people around me? Like, what the, I don't want to use bad language, but it was pretty traumatic. And I think that if people kind of walk through their lives a little by little, like you've done, and do that self examination, that really tough look in the mirror, do that repentance, they're going to get something. They're going to get a gift that is going to last the rest of their lives. And I think that's the gift that I got, with God, and of course, my wife was part of it. So I hope you do get a chance to read that book. It's funny, it's sad, and it's very spiritual.
You should. I asked you for a bio. I don't think you put the link to your book in the bio, so maybe send that to me, and I'll put it. I'll put it in the show notes. Okay.
Oh, I will, and I'm sorry about the foul language, but it's bastard in terms of
That's okay. The
a
technical
child that
term.
doesn't have a father. Yeah, I
Yeah, I'm
hope
not.
there's
I'm
no
not afraid
confusion.
of trashy language on this
Okay,
podcast.
okay,
I
good.
mean, I'm
I didn't want to insult you.
no, 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 not a problem. I'm not that sensitive about stuff like that. I don't think it's. I don't think it's great. Like, I mean, it's a bad habit that I have, actually, dropping f-bombs and everything else. So it's not like I'm superior to anyone, but it's something I'm trying to curb. I've been trying to curb. This is one of those embarrassing things. It's like, yeah, I'm Christian, but it's still got a lot of work to do. On myself. But my friend Jay in the live chat saying that a lot of people in the church think that the church hates them. Maybe that's strong language, but yeah, they feel judged by the church. And as my friend Phil pointed out, it's the sin that God hates. It's the sin. It's not the person, right?
Right.
The church
Hate
doesn't
the
hate
hate the sin,
sinners.
hate the sin, not the sinner. But
Yeah.
what our pastor says is to start with grace.
Okay. So how does that play out practically with a young person who distrusts the church? So
Well,
you walk up to some kid and he hates Christ and his church. So you start with grace. So what does that look like practically?
I think
Be
what
nice.
he was about was going. You don't want to go directly into the judgment. That it is better to welcome them in first and give them the grace, the love of entering the
Okay.
church, and make them feel welcome.
Okay.
And then before those things, start to get
Yeah, you
introduced.
start with the good news and then you bring in the bad news. Because the good news is that we're saved. We have an opportunity to be saved from sin, and the bad news is the sin that you're a sinner. But that's where the humility comes in. So as a last topic here, I think humility is a good place to end this. And I'd like to have you back if it's okay to talk some more. In future, you have an open invitation. You just send me an email. We'll hook you
Okay.
up.
Yeah, I love that.
But for now, to wrap things up, there's so many virtues that we could talk about, and vices. But the virtues, I think humility is one of the most important. So maybe just talk about what have you learned about humility? You mentioned the humiliations, not only your own, but all kinds of humiliations that we're subject to as humans here. And there's a connection between humiliation and being humble and recognizing the truth about who and what we are, and who and what Christ is. So maybe just talk to me about your experience with your whole journey, and how does humility play into that?
Gosh, that, you end it with such a weighty question, David.
Take your
You
time.
know,
Take your time. There's no rush.
you know, there's one humbling aspect, of course, is when you find out you're adopted at 31 years old and you realize that most of your life has been a lie, that people have been lying to you, and that you've been really lying to yourself. But the fact is that even though I was being lied to, I was a conscious human being and I was deceiving myself as well. And I was building myself up into something that I really wasn't. But what I told you was the moment I raised my hand in that church was a moment of surrender. And so I don't know how you can get to salvation without humility. Now, I'm just speaking as a layperson, but unless I humble myself before God and realize my limitations and the fact that I'm a sinner, I'm not really getting anywhere in life. I don't think I need to get anywhere as an author or in any kind of professional capacity. I think that what I need to get to is to be humble before God. And if I can get that, then I think I've achieved something. Um, I'm glad we have humbling experiences in life. I wish I hadn't had the one that I had, but in a way, I think it had to happen because I needed to question who I was. And I needed to question my arrogance and my selfishness. Like you said, it seems to be a trait that you, me, and everybody has in common. Um, and I don't care so much about um, professional successes and these certain things anymore, and I'm pretty much a lot happier than I ever was. I care now about, um like we talked about, getting my family in with God, making sure my children have faith and that it guides their life, and that I have that. And that's a long road that we're gonna have, all of us together. Um, but if I gave you a list of humbling experiences, we would be here
Yeah,
till the cows come home.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure your wife keeps you humble too. They tend to be good at that, right? Like,
When you're in Montana, look, I'll say this. I came here from California. I don't know what it's like in Canada. I'd like to visit one day. We're very close. But coming to Montana, the men here know how to do a lot of things. They know how to build. They know how to
uh,
kill. They knew how to hunt. It's been pretty humbling, honestly. I had never been out hunting. I had
just say you're
never.
from California. Just say, "Hey, I'm from
No,
California. I'm
you
from
do not want to
California."
say that, David. The last thing you want to say is that you're from California.
Ah.
Um, but Grant, because I have come here not to teach these people what I think and how to act and how to behave. And instead, I've decided to come here and learn from them and grow as a man. Um, that's been, I think, the real success in moving the family to a more Christian and conservative part of the country,
Well,
I could
that's
say.
pretty cool. That's pretty cool
Yeah.
experience for you. Were you always considering yourself a lefty by default?
I was about the biggest commie you've ever met.
Jew,
I
call me a Jew. Okay, that's like the stereotype.
Commie, Jew, everything, a radical socialist.
uh,
I made Karl Marx look like J.P. Morgan,
here you
in
go.
terms of it was not good. But it was a humbling experience to kind of go through that. And that's not to say there aren't valid criticisms of
Of course,
economic systems and so
of course, of
forth.
course.
I'm not a bonehead, but
Yeah.
but I, you know, it's I'm less political and more religious now.
Yeah. That's the way to go for sure, for
That
sure, for
makes
sure.
sense. Yeah.
Because they're gonna try to manufacture all your opinions. Like, oh, you have this stance. Like, here's where you fit neatly here. These are your opinions. Don't stray from these set opinions because that's your group that you belong to now. I hate that. I
Well,
hate that.
this modern world, they're picking up with the technology and they're
Uh-huh.
shaping your
Yeah,
opinions.
it's
And I,
ridiculous.
I came out of technology, so that's where my foundation
Ah,
was.
oh,
And it's only recently I've kind of want to live off grid a little bit more because I feel like it's easier to connect with the spiritual in that way. Even though you have to live a little bit in the modern world. I don't want you to think that I'm up in a cabin or something like that, make plotting my revenge of
I see
something.
those. I see those birch trees behind you there.
Right, right. No, I mean, it's Montana, but it helps you, you're in Canada also. You're very blessed with a beautiful land, and um
Beautiful Prime
it
Minister.
helps. It helps to take those walks and, step away from the zeros and ones.
Yeah, before going live, I pointed out your bed covering there, how it was like a ripoff of the Hudson's Bay Company. So I'm gonna send a letter, an angry letter to the company. You told me the name of the
Yeah,
company.
it's you're gonna cause them some problems, but they have to know they're violating copyright.
Absolutely. So do you guys have Tim Hortons down there yet or not yet?
We don't have, I don't want to diss it, but
Uh-huh.
they try not to have too many kind of brand names and things like that to keep
Okay.
a,
Oh, okay.
but I mean, there's a section of town that has the Walmarts and
Okay.
the big brands
Strip
and the big names
malls
and
and all that.
everything like that. But where I live, oh my gosh, you eat at home. No, we live in the woods,
Okay.
The fridge, that's the restaurant.
Yeah, well, have you heard about the donut chain up here, Tim Hortons? You know about it?
No, well, I've heard of Tim Hortons. Yeah.
He was a hockey player, Canadian hockey player, and
Yes,
he
yes,
he
I've heard of
built
him.
he made really delicious donuts, and then over the years, it's just been getting cheaper and crappier, and it used to be the best donuts, the best coffee, and just it's not the same. But they're thinking about the only reason I'm mentioning this is Canadiana. Like we got Hudson's Bay Company, we got Tim Hortons,
Oh yeah,
we
yeah.
got maple syrup, we got poutine. So there's a lot to
Oh, I
experience if you come
imagine.
up.
It's a knockoff. I'm sure we got a Tim Hortons knockoff somewhere.
Well, your donuts are good in the States. Your donuts are very good, I think. I don't know if you
We
eat the
have
donuts.
Dunkin' Donuts. We
I
have
love
Dunkin'.
Dunkin' Donuts. I love Dunkin' Donuts.
And we have Krispy Kreme.
Oh, fancy. Are they expensive?
Everything's expensive nowadays.
Bidenomics.
Man, it is what it is, So it's does hopefully it'll start, reversing because it's tough for people to live
Yeah.
and it's tough for people to eat and you know,
Well,
sad, but it is the way it is.
take care of yourself and your family there, and I'm going to be praying for you and yours. I enroll all of my guests in a perpetual mass, so you get the graces of that. And next time when you come back, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about Christian unity and the Catholic Church and what it means to me and what your Messianic Judaism and your non-denominational church that you go to and all that sort of stuff. That'll be fun to have you back. Okay.
Thank you.
And
Thanks,
try
Jay.
to
It's great
remember
talking to you.
me, add me to that long list of prayers that you do, me and my family. Add us. Just write it down. You don't need to name me by name out loud every time, but I'd like to be on your prayer list. Okay.
Well, we'll definitely do it tonight by name. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much, and God bless you. We'll talk soon. Okay.
God bless you.
Bye bye.